All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back after the lunch break to the second academic forum at the Hong Kong Social Enterprise Summit. This is the second academic forum that we had. Last year we had very interesting sessions on the debates about social entrepreneurship and its boundary. This year we're going to focus on a new topic, platform cooperativism in the age of Industrial Revolution 4.0. My name is Yanto Chandra. I'm a professor at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University and also director of Center for Social Policy and Social Entrepreneurship, the first center of its kind in Hong Kong. My friend Jack is not around, so I will be moderating the entire session. We put this together in view of a rising interest on platform cooperatives. So if we look at the topic from the title, the two key words there, first is the platform cooperatives, and second is the context, which is the Industrial Revolution 4.0. I will try to take this very quickly before I introduce the speakers, and then we're going to have more time for Q&A and for us to discuss among the speakers and inviting you to join in the conversation. Have anybody heard of platform cooperatives? Okay, not too many. It is relatively a new sector, new industry, and even newer as a field of academic research and study. But let me assure you that today's academic forum will not be boring or dry or too theoretical. It won't be. So platform cooperatives. When we talk about platform cooperatives, let's start with the basic word called cooperatives. When did the first cooperative came about? It really has a very long history. So anyone talking about platform cooperatives can refer back to the original cooperative movements that dated back to 1800s or the 19th century. The revolution started in those years in a city called Rochdale in England. But why did the world need cooperatives? Why did the cooperative movement start? If you recall, in the 19th century, we had what we call the first industrial revolution, the invention of the steam engine, etc., that revolutionized how people produce things. Right? In the past, people weave clothes or fabrics by hand traditionally. Now we have a new machine to create mills that produce textiles on a larger industrial scale that are much faster in terms of output and even quality. So around those times, it was a difficult time. And we can see the Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution, had some impact in the lives of ordinary people. So imagine if you were an artisan who normally weave textiles and do all kinds of jobs at the time, and your job are being disrupted by the rise of a new technology, the machinization of how we produce, how we make things. Then you can see that it replaces a lot of people's jobs. And it also creates a lot of social problems, social issues, such as the price of goods and services becomes less affordable to the common people. So you can start to see the role of the context there after the Industrial Revolution, and people thinking their lives are being affected by such revolution, and they need to organize among themselves to create what we call the first cooperatives. It was a retail, what we call consumer cooperatives, in which consumers come together and form a cooperative selling things, basic daily necessary products. Does it sound familiar? Everyone is now talking about robots, artificial intelligence, drones, Internet of Things. There are a number of things that are classified as the fourth Industrial Revolution. So I'm kind of like skipping the history here. We're now at the fourth Industrial Revolution. How is this going to impact our lives? How is it going to impact ordinary people's lives, workers, etc., etc.? And some of these answers can be found in the cooperatives movement that have started much earlier. If you look at the history, actually, even in the proto-society that we have today, much earlier, perhaps in the 12th or 13th century, there are a number of people who gathered together to provide things among themselves, which is what we call now the sharing economy. Because in those tribal economy, people live as small communities, protecting each other, providing and helping one another. So what is this thing called platform cooperatives? Let me start with just 2 points to kick off this conversation, because I'm not going to provide all the answers here. Platform cooperatives. So it is a cooperatives, and these cooperatives are running online, on online platforms. That's why we call them platform cooperatives. Now the basic questions that we have in economics is about what do we need to produce? Yeah? When do we produce things? Where to produce these things? How much do we need to produce these things, right? If you are a company, a social enterprise, an NGO, then you are dealing with these questions every day. The same, if you are government, you need to think about these things. So the what, when, where, how much to produce is a question for any organization that is trying to produce something. Now, when we come to the context of platform cooperatives, we are talking about who is making these decisions. Now, in the current context of contemporary capitalism, in which a lot of people have disappointment with, because it has created a lot of inequality, social inequality, but also it improved people's life at the same time. So there are 2 big schools of thought that are debating about the merits of capitalism to people's life, to the progress of the world. Those debates can be seen from this question. Now, the question is, who can decide, or who has the authority, the power to decide on the production of goods and services? What, where, when, how? In the context of platform cooperatives, unlike in the traditional company or for-profit companies, in traditional for-profit companies, typically it's a small number of elite decision makers who are called the management team or the key shareholders. These are the small number of people who are making the decisions on what to produce, when to produce, where to produce, and how much to produce to achieve a certain goals. In the context of cooperatives, including in the context of platform cooperatives, these decisions are typically made by members of the organizations. And what this means are people who join or belong to these cooperatives are the owners, are the people who have the decisions to make decisions of all these questions: what to produce, where, when, how much to produce. Second part is perhaps the most distinguishing features of cooperatives. And we can differentiate even how social enterprise is different from platform cooperatives. But of course, the entire conversation tend to frame platform cooperatives as part of the social economy or social entrepreneurship field. If we talk about the ownership, in a traditional company, the people who chip in the money to start an organization, to produce some services, some goods, or the people who invest, we call them the investors or the shareholders. These are the people who own the organization, people who own the activities. But in the context of platform cooperatives, we're talking about particularly worker-owned cooperatives here. The ownership of that organization as a cooperative, the ownership goes to the members, the people who are members of the organization. So you can see perhaps an example of Mondragon. If you have heard of Mondragon, perhaps one of the world's largest cooperatives. They manufacture washing machine and all kind of goods in Spain. You can see that the cooperatives are owned by the workers, by the people. So perhaps this could be an answer to the kind of situation that we are living in when jobs are disrupted, when technologies are replacing people, etc., etc. But let's see what we can come up with from today's conversation. So we wanted to spark this conversation, perhaps because this is perhaps the first, one of the first official conversation on platform cooperatives in Hong Kong. Of course, there was one last year in Chinese University of Hong Kong, but here we want to talk more about all these questions. So we have great speakers with us this afternoon. We have Bonnie Chiu, who is a founder of Lensational. She will tell you a little bit more about what they mean, Lensational, online stuff. And we have Mr. Michael Cook, who is unable to be with us this afternoon, but he will have a video for us. And last but not least, we have Mr. Nathan Schneider, a former journalist and currently assistant professor of media studies in the University of Colorado in the United States. He's also written 1 or 2 books on this topic. So without further ado, let's welcome the first speakers. I'm going to do it slightly differently because we have a slight change in the original schedule. We're going to start with Nathan, who will provide a little bit of a landscape of platform cooperatives, and then we're going to have the video by Mike Cook. Mike Cook is the CEO of Stocksy. Stocksy is an artist-owned online photography platform. Typically, if you're selling your photography as a freelance, the majority of the profit will go to your agent. But if you are joining Stocksy as an owner, you become an owner, as a member and owner of the platform, so you share the profits. And then last but not least, we have the last speaker will be Bonnie, and then we'll have more time for conversation among us, and we invite you guys to participate in the Q&A. Thank you. Let's give a big applause to Nathan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really, I think, fitting to have this conversation in the context that we're in. This too, in addition, as the unrest in Hong Kong is today, about the future of democracy. In this case, less about the future of democracy in government and politics, and more about how we can build democracy into how we run the economy. So I'll begin with a bit of a crazy idea. A few years ago in 2016, 2017, I was part of a group of people, largely people who were involved in building this movement of platform cooperativism, who had the rather intrepid scheme to convert Twitter to user ownership. At the time in 2016, Twitter was maybe up for sale. And this was kind of shocking to many of us who can't come to rely on this platform, that our commons was actually a commodity. And so we developed a shareholder proposal. We realized we had enough Twitter shares in our community that we could actually make a shareholder proposal to the company, asking it to at least explore options for community ownership rather than just shareholder ownership. They fought us off at the SEC. We won, got to the shareholder meeting, and got a respectable about 4% of the vote. Allows us to resubmit and try again. But at the time, we got a lot of media coverage. It was all kind of like, what a wacko idea. Who are these crazy people? Isn't this kind of interesting, but mostly nuts? And this was, of course, in the context of this movement to build a cooperative internet. You'll hear next from Mike Cook, who is now the CEO of one of the leading companies in this community, in this network of people trying to build co-ownership and co-governance into the online economy. So we thought we had something, we had a sensible idea, but at the time, it was just so out there. Then, just a couple of years later, in 2018, last year, the companies that had long been kind of our enemies in this work started submitting letters to the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States, asking it to allow them to share ownership with their users. Uber wanted to share ownership with company ownership, stock, grants, with its drivers. Airbnb wanted to share ownership with its hosts. For various reasons, trying to build loyalty and that sort of thing. But it was kind of shocking. All of a sudden, the biggest companies in the platform economy were actually seeing value and opportunity in the stuff that we have been proposing in this radical idea of democratic ownership and perhaps even governance in the platform economy. Now, it makes me wonder whether this could be the germ of a new paradigm. You know, a world in which platform economies, rather than racing to exploit their users' personal data and underpay users and violate labor protection laws that have been fought for by workers for generations. What if instead companies were actually in a race to the top to share ownership and the benefits of ownership more and more widely? This could actually help address some of the profound accountability crises that we're facing in the online economy around data protection, around labor rights, create shared benefit, as well as the benefit of facilitating user acquisition and loyalty. Now, this has gotten me thinking, you know, what if we had a new approach in the startup economy? And a third option to the usual destinations that tech startups aim toward, which are either an exit to acquisition by a bigger company or an exit to a market offering. Now, these are the key outcomes that investors look for when they invest in tech companies, in startups of all sorts. But what if actually there were another option? A way in which companies could aim toward, build toward, work toward with their investors, with their early founders, early employees, an exit to community, where the return comes when the community of participants in the platform takes ownership over the company. So I'm going to walk through a few different ways in which this might come about. Using the example of a fictional social media network called Co-Social. I'm going to be a little brief here because we're trying to keep plenty of time for discussion, so I won't go into a lot of the details. But imagine a kind of Reddit-like social network, maybe with a gig economy attached, where you're sharing news, but you're also able to get gigs on the platform, and so people are transacting money on the platform, doing work on it, as well as putting their personal data in. So it kind of encapsulates all the problems of the online economy. But it's also not quite a unicorn. It's not taken over the universe yet. It's kind of struggling to compete with the big ones, and it needs a new strategy. So one option could be a kind of leveraged user buyout. So of course, many of these users are not going to throw their own money at buying up lots of stock in a company like this. They probably don't have the resources to do that. There's a massive coordination problem. But actually, there are some existing strategies. For instance, employee stock ownership plans in the US that use trust structures to operate on behalf of those, in the case of an ESOP, employees or users, raise money from banks or other investment vehicles, and conduct a buyout, and then benefit from the eventual ownership of the company. This might be through, again, a trust structure or a cooperative. It depends a lot on the regulatory environment. This could be mainly for the benefit of governance, for the purposes of governance, so users might share some oversight of the company, similar to what Facebook is now doing with having an independent oversight board mediated by a trust. Or it could be more focused on sharing the benefits of gig work, right? Something more like what Uber is trying to do, ensuring that if the company turns a profit and starts distributing dividends, users see the benefits of that. And again and again, when we team up these crazy ideas, we also start finding companies that are actually doing this. NIO, which is an electric vehicle company in Shanghai, earlier this year granted about a third of its stock to a user trust on behalf of its users, very much along the lines of what we're talking about here. Now, another approach could be federation, where you actually distribute the the control and ownership of the platform. Rather than centralizing the platform, to actually spread it out, spread ownership out among its stakeholders. An example of this is the Visa credit card network, which started out as a product of Bank of America, and which actually didn't really work that way. The way to build trust in that product actually turned out to be spinning it off as a cooperative co-owned by local banks at the time around the United States. So this cooperative structure actually enabled the network effects to grow and to ensure trust in the system. Now, this could be something like Bank of America, a voluntary rollout, or it could actually be a tool of antitrust regulation, which we're seeing a lot of interest in now, where there's demands to break up some of these big platform companies. Maybe that breakup could occur through federation, smaller entities owning, a larger platform together and having more diverse stakeholdership. Now, a third approach, a little more on the crazy side, is tokenization, using blockchain technologies to distribute ownership. In this case, maybe Co-Social employs a token system for people trading, paying each other for gigs on the platform, and that token system ends up kind of becoming more valuable than the company itself, and allows for user governance and participation more than just transaction. Now, again, this sounds totally nuts, except that we see a company like Facebook actually proposing something very much along these lines with its, very problematic but also very interesting Libra proposal to create a tokenized payment system within the platform. Now, these kinds of approaches, in addition to providing some new options to existing companies like those I've mentioned, Uber and Facebook, I think are most important because they might speak to the needs of startup communities and founders who have not been well served by the current venture ecosystem, who are trying to build companies for their communities, but feel unable to because the venture model with growth at all costs, investor benefit as the main objective, doesn't serve what they're trying to achieve. This is a graphic from the Zebras Unite community, which is a network of founders, largely women and people of color, who are trying to challenge the norms of the existing startup ecosystem. And these kinds of models require some new rules, new strategies, new culture in the startup economy. That includes new approaches to financing that are compatible with this kind of exit strategy. Thinking about what an early stage startup might look like in a case where it's aiming toward cultivating a future community of owners, as well as policy prerequisites. And when I mentioned ESOP earlier, that kind of model only became financeable when it got enshrined into federal law in the US in 1974. We need to recognize that our financing ecosystem is designed for a small number of wealthy owners to benefit. It's not designed for democratic ownership, and we need to change that. So this is an invitation above all to you to consider whether this kind of model might work for the kinds of enterprises you're working with. Is community ownership a potential end game for your startup, your social enterprise? Is ownership a way to ensure that the social mission of the enterprise is really encoded into its DNA? And can this provide the kind of financial returns and benefits for the early stage risk that founders need in order to do what they do best? I look forward to discussing with you. This is an ongoing project of my lab at CU Boulder, and would love to collaborate. Thank you.
Then this is the video by Mike from Scotland.
Stocksy was created by artists for artists. It changed the way the world saw stock photography. And now, more so than ever before, to put an end to the way the stock industry exploits its artists. We've created a co-op that champions extraordinary videos and images, and the artists who create them. A place where creativity, authenticity, and inspiration are promised and delivered, and artists are respected and treated fairly. But our story isn't just about selling photos and videos, or reinventing stock. It's about a community of people gaining power through collaboration. It's about giving back more than we take. It's about giving our buyers art that inspires them. It's about having the integrity to know that what we're creating, it's worth fighting for. We sail on a tumultuous sea filled with large, competitive monsters and content increasingly being devalued in a race to zero. We have a ship, and what a ship it is. Built on a governance model that ensures a voice for all. Small yet sturdy, sleek and maneuverable, that allows us to be agile and pivot where need be. And the crew. My God, what a crew. From contributors to staff, we are capable, committed, honest and tough, bound together with trust that we have each other's backs, that we can show the world there's a better, fairer way to do business. We are artists.
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 We are artists. We are artists.
We are artists. We are artists.
We are artists. We are united. Well, I just love that video because it ultimately captures everything that Stocksy is about. We are artists, we are united. Our platform Co-op was, as it said in the video, founded by artists in order to support artists. And that's been our raison d'etre since the beginning. But for those of you who aren't as familiar with Stocksy, maybe I'll throw a few more numbers at you. We've been in existence since 2013. We've built ourselves up to having over 1,100 members who are based in over 65 countries. And those members are cinematographers and photographers who contribute photos and videos to our site that we then market to businesses around the world who are focused on meeting high-end design materials for their own marketing campaigns and their own projects. And we sell to social media firms, design firms, all around the world. But one of the most compelling numbers for me in regards to why we are a co-op is in the 6 years in our existence, we've been able to pay out over $21 million to our members to assist them in being a success as they define it. And that's something that we take very seriously and we're very proud of. But I didn't want to spend my whole talk just talking about Stocksy itself. I wanted to focus on a few things that I think are needed if you're going to run a co-op successfully, and the things you should be aware of. And in the hopes that maybe there's something there that you can take back to your respective co-ops or other social endeavors. And so one of the key things that you need to be aware of, especially in the platform co-op space, is you need to be able to maintain balance. And balance, what I mean by that is, you of course, because of our governance structure, we allow contributors to have a say in the business. They get to help guide the direction of the company. But we're a tech company. We need to be able to move quickly and make quick decisions and be agile and even pivot at certain times quickly. And maintain that balance in a co-op is extremely difficult. It's a challenge, but it's one you have to take on. So how do you maintain balance, or what would help you maintain balance? Well, one of the key things for that, I believe, is trust. If your members trust what you're doing and they trust that you've got their backs, then it gives you far greater freedom and ability to make quick decisions and to pivot and to move quickly. That trust is crucial in order to maintain that balance. I kind of view it, it's like a currency. And one of two things is happening at all times in your co-op. You're either building up trust and banking it, or you're spending it. And you ultimately do both in the course of any given day. Ideally, you're banking more than you're spending, but Having that trust is key. So how do you build trust? Well, through transparency. And it's an overused expression in business. Everybody always hears you need to be transparent, you need to be transparent. But you really need to take this to heart in a co-op. And the more transparent you can be to your members about the good and the bad that's going on, the more that you will build trust. And the more you can then achieve that balance. So transparency is crucial in order to build that trust. So how do you be transparent? What's the best way to do that? Well, every co-op will have different methods for this, but you need to have some really good solid tools to help you do this. So at Stocksy, some of the things we employ are we have monthly reporting. It's not very original. We call them end-of-month reports. But that monthly reporting, that monthly report comes out with a list of all the things we've achieved on the tech front, on the marketing front, on the UX front, on the contributor relations front, as well as information on the financials and some of the key metrics that we rely on within the company. And it's sent out without fail within 3 or 4 days after the close of every month. Our site itself actually publishes some of the financial data automatically at the end of the month so that members can be aware of exactly how we did in the month previously. We also have a member news functionality that allows our artist relations team to communicate directly to our members when there's things like new trends or types of photos we think we need, then we can communicate with the members through this member news functionality. And of course the forums where they can discuss with themselves and support each other and talk to HQ we have in place as well. And of course a key component that is in every co-op or should be in every co-op is the capacity for members to submit resolutions. And we have a resolution system that looks pretty complex when you look at the workflow chart that you see, but it's relatively simple. It allows members to submit an idea and members can start to vote on whether the idea is good enough to advance to the board, which then allows the board to decide whether it should just be implemented right away or whether it should go to a formal resolution vote. And the system's been built so that it automatically records the voting and tracks quorum, and we've automated just about all the pieces of it that we can so that members are in a better position and we are in a better position to talk and to understand a particular resolution and what's good or bad about it. So this is a pretty crucial part of, I believe, a platform co-op when you have members in multiple countries. Having a process by which members can have a say and in such a dispersed way is absolutely vital. So if you have these right tools in place and you utilize them and you use them effectively, then you're going to maintain this level of transparency to the members that allows you to then build trust with them so that they know that you've got their back and they know that you're doing the right thing for them. And that trust ultimately lets you maintain that balance you need so that you can make the quick decisions back and forth. But there is one key thing that you need to be aware of if you do all this very effectively. And that is that on any given day, you as a leader in the company, whether you're CEO or you're anywhere in the company where you are leading other people and you are trying to drive forward with the co-op, you need to be prepared to look like this guy. Standing there in all your glory, in your underwear, flaws and all, exposed to the world, but with a smile on your face. Because you know that no matter what the difficulties are you're facing, because you're a co-op, you can overcome them together. Thank you.
Allow me to give a quick summary, because it's quite a long video. So what Stocksy is doing is to sell photographs taken by artists, but most of the profits of this work will go to the artist instead of going to an agency or some third party that is hosting the work. So it's a very different model compared to traditional how companies work. So that's why it has a social and economic dimensions into it. Very much like if you have heard about Uber, how many taxi drivers were not very pleased about how Uber operates, because it was the taxi drivers who put most of the time and effort in using their own cars to run the taxi services. But primarily the profits and a lot of the major decisions are made by a small group of shareholders. But taxi drivers who are discontent with how Uber works then span out and create their own cooperatives. And one example is called the green taxi in the United States, in the Silicon Valley area. So by having this green taxi, the taxi drivers themselves own this organization and share the profits. And there are many other examples. So let us have the next or the last speakers before we have more conversations. Bonnie Chu.
Hi everyone, so I'm Bonnie, I'm from Hong Kong. I think when I received the invitation to speak, I wasn't really sure what platform co-operativism is. And now I know why I was invited to speak. So some reflections before I delve into talking about the social enterprise I started, Lensational, back in 2013. I was very impressed with what Nathan has been saying because I've been immersed in the startup world. In the first few years of starting my own organization, I tried to go and raise funding because I thought, well, you need that to get some actions going. And then I realized that the values of a venture capital world is very different from my own values and the values that our organization has. But there's not a new kind of model for us to really attract funding. So basically we decided not to do that and just build it step by step. And I think when you look at kind of our organizational journey, you can see our evolution, and hopefully I think from this conversation we can really emerge with some concrete actions around how we can make people with money think differently, and also people who are founding companies to think differently about scaling. So I'll tell you a bit about Lensational. This is a photograph from our program in Ghana. So I started Lensational with the concept of empowering marginalized women and girls with photography and storytelling training. So I started it as a Facebook page on International Women's Day 2013. That was a few months before I graduated from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I started that as a Facebook page also because I was not able to get support from my university back in the day to actually get funding for my own enterprise. But I thought, well, I have this idea, I will just start it. And I think the origination of this as a Facebook page already very much enshrines our ideas around this being an open kind of something that's owned by not just me as the person behind the idea, but actually much broader is for our community. I started this photo from Ghana because this is basically what we do. We provide women and girls with cameras or mobile phones, and we train them photography. You can see we always train in groups, and it's always about people coming together and learning together. From our Ghana program, I heard 2 weeks ago that one of our students that we started teaching 2 years ago now got a job as a full-time photographer. She's only 18. Her name is Mystery. So I want to start with this photograph just to give you a bit of idea how this idea is actually implemented. The mission started as a social enterprise, but I think the past 6 years I've learned it is really about building a movement. It's about building a movement of people who are committed to this idea that women and girls' voices deserve to be heard. And in the context of photography, you've seen from Michael that he mentioned a bit that stock photography is actually dominated by quite a few big players. They are mainly from Europe and the United States, and he is trying to democratize stock photography. It's very similar to also what we are doing from our business side. We are providing stock photos from marginalized communities, but we put gender front and center because there's a real lack of gender diversity within the stock photography world and photography more broadly. So this is a photo of our photographers from Thailand. They are Burmese women. and they are part of this. Also quite like a cooperative, it's a ecotourism hotel, and they are working there as trainees, and we're providing we're providing photography training for them. So here's a bit of our approach. We start with training. We also provide ongoing mentorship. We then, the outcomes that we are seeking are really emotional empowerment, that women and girls have a voice, a base of strength, and that they get support from each other. It's also economic empowerment. And 50% of our revenue from photography sales go directly to the women who has taken that photograph. And interestingly, I would say some women who have received the money actually decide to share it with the same community. So I remember 4 or 5 years ago, we sold a photograph worth quite a lot. We sold it for $400. We sold it to Marie Claire, it's the magazine, because they wrote a feature about us. So the girl who taken it is, she was at that time 13 years old in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar. So it's a relatively rural area. And now Cox's Bazar is famous because it houses a lot of Rohingya refugees fleeing Myanmar. So I remember when we talked to our local partner about this great win that she, $400 is a lot of money and she would get $200. The girl decided to actually share it with the community, so they're creating this kind of community savings pot that they could, that the community of girls who have participated in the same training can access the funding, and they are really trying to help each other succeed. So when I saw that example, I thought this concept of maybe individualism that we might have growing up in Hong Kong or in other Western countries might very much see, okay, I make the money, it belongs to me. But what I learned from our women and girls is that actually in many of the communities, this idea of sharing and communal savings are very prevalent in their culture, and that as an organization, we should definitely encourage that. So some of our impact to date, we've trained over 800 women. We have trainings in 23 countries. We are not as kind of, we're making money and slowly progressing, but it still is a lot. This dollar is Hong Kong dollar. I wish it's like US dollars, and that will make me really happy. And so, but 50% does go back to the women and girls. And what we are thinking now is how can we generate money more equitably, because as you can imagine, some of the girls and women we train are really star photographers, and they're just very talented in it, so they make majority of the money. But how can we really share that across our network is something that we're wrestling with. So I want to share with you an example of our student, because I'm very pleased to share it in Hong Kong, because she is one of the 300,000 domestic workers who are serving our families every day. So her name is Joanne Pabona. You might have seen her on news. I think she had a big article on SCMP last year because she won the National Geographic Award, Photography Award. They had, I think she was the only woman of that year to win, and not the only non-Chinese to win. So this is the photograph that she kind of got the award for. We met Joanne around 3 years ago, and for her, like, she started photography already, but having this network of women learning photography gave her a lot of confidence to be pursuing her dreams further. And the poster here is a photograph of her winning an award in the US, and we were quite proud to have supported her to get this award in the US. So this is just our global footprint. I think back to the idea of platform co-operatism, we are set up as a non-profit, so no one really owns the organization. But I do think a lot about our exit and what could that look like, and I like really the idea of community ownership. I mean, for me, our network of 800 women and girls own the organization, and on top of that we have 100 volunteers. But how can we codify that to make sure that they really feel the power to be making decisions? So I'm going to ask Nathan for some advice for sure in how to take to the next step. But I do think we represent platform co-operativism. We don't just have one platform. I mean, some of our women and girls don't even have access to mobile phones, so we really have to connect with them in just very traditional manner, not even Industrial Revolution 4.0. But some of us, we do connect on Facebook, WhatsApp, but for me, platform is really the idea that actually national borders don't really matter so much. It's the same group of people with the same mission and vision, no matter where they are, and they are making progress together as a whole. So some learnings for me, 3 big learnings to end with, and hopefully start some discussions with you. What I learned about organizational and the success we have in all these countries. Someone told me the other day about the friendship formula. So 2 photos before I get into the friendship formula. One down there is my grandmother who raised me. She was born in Indonesia and came to Hong Kong as a refugee many years ago. But this is a photo of her hugging one of our students, Anik, and you could see just how they were connected at that point. And the other photo, which I really like from our students, and that kind of them just jumping and having fun, and them feeling liberated. So I think what is the most powerful about our network of women and girls is really this friendship formula, which basically means proximity, that you're close to each other, that you know each other. Frequency, how frequent you connect, how long you connect for, and the intensity of that. So the friendship formula was conceptualized, I was told, by the FBI, the American kind of spying entities, something of that sort, to influence their enemies to take actions against their own interests. So the friendship formula is very powerful, and it is a way to ensure that you can get people to ally with you to create change. And I see that in our network is a lot of these friendships, because the friendships are enrooted in values, not just exchange of goods and services. Very traditionally, economics 101 is a barter economy. You give me something, I give you something in return. It's very transactional. But I think because our organization is so much about emotional connection and photography and storytelling, that actually everyone's connected in this network of friendships. The second is beyond heropreneurship. So one photo from very early on in Pakistan, taken by one of the girls. We were teaching in non-formal schools, and you could see this young boy. He just decided to step in front of the 6 girls who were actually just posing for a photograph. He decided to stand up there as a man. And I mean, this is, I think, for me, a very good insight into gender norms and how they form at such a young age. But I would say this photograph represents the current model of leadership in politics, in corporations, everywhere we see. That is one person at the forefront, usually men, driving change and people following. But I think we are moving to this new world where it's not just one person driving change, it's really the network of people. And another photograph from Bhutan that I thought was so wise. This little girl was showing this stone where it was engraved, living for others is the rule of nature. So I really like that, and I think it encapsulates my own values, the values of Lensation, and I think, if I'm right to say, also the values of the platform co-operativism movement. The final one, which I think Michael has addressed on and on again, transparency and equity. I kind of just share with you 2 photographs because we have been thinking a lot about the environment, and this is one theme that we saw coming from our students. I remember around 2 years ago, I started looking at our photos, and I saw a lot of our students actually taking photos of girls fetching water. So I then did a bit of research into it and saw that with increasing environmental degradation, that girls are spending more time walking to the wells and fetching water, and therefore skipping time on schools and expose themselves to a lot of danger, etc. So we started thinking about the environment, and we published a photo book for the first time early this year called Our Shared Forest. So the reason why I want to bring this up, in light of, is the last slide on kind of my reflections on platform co-operativism, is that I think we also need to bring back to the environment and the situation, the context in which we live in. The old form of capitalism, or even the current form of capitalism, has been very much about perhaps destroying the environment or not respecting the environment to its fullest. And I think when I look at some of the photographs, I see that our women and girls, in many communities, they have traditional links to the environment, that they're always living within our planetary boundaries. And I think kind of platform cooperativism, I mean, embedding these kind of notions around transparency and equity are also allowing us to kind of get back to our roots, and for us to really create this shared forest, as our book is called, where we live one with nature and we think about the consequences of our actions to people, but also to planet. So that's the end of my sharing. Thank you.
What a great pleasure to share the stage with two of you. I think in order to make it clearer to the audience about what platform cooperatives is, let's go for more examples. So I mentioned early on that nearly all platform economy that we have heard of, there's a counter to that in the form of cooperatives, or what we call platform cooperatives. So for Uber, it's a platform economy, profit-oriented, and there's a counter to that in the form of platform cooperatives called green taxi. Yeah? For Airbnb, as a platform economy, there's another counter to that in the form of platform cooperatives. Any other examples? Can you guys mention?
Yeah, so for instance, for Airbnb, there's actually a Fairbnb that is
Fairbnb.
in the process of launching in Europe right now, and just got a loan from a cooperative bank, which is very exciting, a bridge from the older cooperative movement to the new. For personal data, one example is Vidata, which is a Swiss platform co-op started by medical researchers, where patients own the data that they put into the platform. They can use it to share it selectively with doctors and other providers, and allow researchers to use the data. That's also a revenue source for the platform. Absolutely, we're seeing these emerge in a range of industries in the kind of transportation gig economy. We have a couple of platforms emerging, especially in Europe, around bike delivery. So there are projects kind of coming out of especially Deliveroo drivers who are building a consortium of co-ops using a shared delivery platform. And then also car share cooperatives across Europe, and there's another in Canada as well, that produce software that allow local groups to develop their own car share systems. And for instance, I'm a member of a local car share system that gets its software from a cooperative in Canada. And again, this suggests that these models look at scale very differently. In each of these cases, these are local models designed to be replicated and to share software across the community of collaborating co-ops. So they don't aim to take over an industry and drive everybody out and to globalize with the kind of, I saw an Uber ad recently, Uber in whatever language is Uber, right? Uber is everywhere. The model in these cases is often to scale through replication and collaboration.
Great. But what's interesting is there may be other type of organizations that don't know that they are running a platform cooperatives, such as bonus realization. They became aware of this, that they're actually embracing the concept of cooperatives. So let's spend about maybe 10-15 minutes for the stage, and then we'll go to the audience. Let's start with the strengths. What do you see as the strengths of platform cooperatives compared to the existing model of organization, be it for-profit organization, be it non-profit organization, be it social enterprise? What are the key strengths of platform cooperatives?
I think there are lots of strengths, and I wish I knew about platform cooperative earlier, so I can really build it as a platform cooperative. Because I think it's a relatively new concept, at least in Hong Kong or even in the UK. I don't feel we're having those discussions. I think compared to non-profit, I can talk about that because we are set up as a non-profit. As a non-profit, I mean, depending on where you're registered, there are quite a lot of regulations. So in the UK, there's a charity regulator, and they need us to be really risk averse. And we needed to have trustees who would have legal responsibilities, and it's very focused on this country, like the UK, for example. So it's geographically bound, and we always find, wow, but we are actually operating in a global world where actually national borders don't matter so much. But we don't really find this structure helpful for us because we have to be so bound by these regulations, and it then ends up being really bureaucratic, and we don't have the ability to really represent our users. So I think platform cooperative can get around that compared to non-profit. The second thing is coming back to, and this might sound quite kind of over the top, but thinking really about our economic system. As a non-profit, we're making profits, but it all goes back to our organization. And our organization doesn't really have a quote-unquote value in the financial markets because there's nothing to trade. And thinking about who owns our world and think about resources and the bigger picture around wealth inequality, and that there's now a lot of inequality around wealth accumulation, and that we are also competing against people who are much wealthier than us. We have to actually give a bit more resources, financial resources, to the marginalized. And I think in our case, maybe turning more into a platform cooperative where our women and girls actually own shares in the company, and that they can trade shares, in the context which they are not owning anything now. I think it could be really transformative and give them this step up to really change the course of their economic life. And non-profit is just kind of not doing that, and we are trying so hard to kind of raise money and trying to do as much as we can, but we are competing really against this kind of big economic system, and we kind of feel that we are too small a player. And so I think platform cooperative kind of is a good bridge between non-profit and the for-profit. It kind of encapsulates the spirit of a non-profit, which is like not one person owns it, and that you think about your public benefit, at least to your community. First, it's a for-profit that you actually can compete easier, and you get more access to finance and scale much more quickly.
So it's a way of organizing for public benefit or for the community. Well, what about Nathan?
The benefits can really depend on the nature of the business. So for instance, Stocksy is kind of a high-end play. They are in a very crowded market, right? You have stock photography where there's some big platforms. It was actually founded by people who helped build one of the big platforms. Brianna Wetlaufer was one of the key founders, was the former CEO before Mike, amazing entrepreneur, and she helped build one of now the major competitors of Stocksy, and saw how the investor-owned model was driving down quality, was putting less and less money in the pockets of photographers, and thought this is a bad cycle. We need to create a cycle where our incentive is to actually bring more resources to photographers, to reward those who are doing awesome work, and turn to the co-op model as a means to that end. And so the co-ownership helps attract some of the best people in the business and enable them to take a slice at the top of that very competitive market. On the other side, in a case like Green Taxi or other, or some of those bike delivery models, they're working at the bottom of these markets often, where people are being squeezed, low-income workers are being squeezed, and they need to cut out the tax that they were paying to the 1%, right? They need to stop giving up so much of their income, the value they're producing, to those who aren't producing through their labor, and the cooperative model creates an advantage for them to reduce costs and reap more of the benefits of what they're producing. So it really depends on what problem you're trying to solve, and cooperative models, as they have in the past, as you suggested, are a way to create market dynamics that might not exist in an investor-owned business.
Okay, a little bit to organizational. Earlier I mentioned about decisions, about what, where, when, who to produce, and the concept of ownership. You mentioned early on that 50% of the profit generated by the organization will go to these individual photographers. But the revenue, so it's a gross revenue, not net profit. So, but who decided this 50% figure? Why not 70% or 90% or 40%? Who decided and why 50%?
I mean, it's a good question, and I decided, so it's not very democratic. And I mean, the decision at that point was what's the fairest compensation we could give to our photographers. We looked at industry benchmark. Getty Images give 25% of revenue to the photographers. So we looked at, okay, people are generally 25%, so 50% maximum. And we also did the financial model and see, well, there's cost to actually producing this photograph because we provide free training and etc. So we did the math and decided on 50% is what can make the books kind of balance as well as a easy to communicate way to our community, and bearing in mind that our community is really not financially savvy. I mean, most of them are illiterate or have only informal education, and so having something that's easy to communicate. But I think learning more about platform cooperativism and learning more about what other people are doing to really engage with communities, and I've mentioned, actually we've learned tremendously from our students around actually their values on, for example, the coexistence with the environment. That I think these concepts are not alien to their culture, and that I could do an exercise to actually think through what is fair. And I think what has been stopping us has been the lack of examples. That we don't know who's doing this, and we already feel we are too new and or too different an organization for people to get their heads around. So we don't want to be too radical because then no one will support us. But now I know about other examples like Stocksy, and I could also learn from them. I mean, how the resolution, like the very complex decision chart that they have. I mean, that's helpful for us because then we can learn from others how they've built a democratic governance within their organization. I mean, what we then need to do is thinking through that we operate in such disparate geographies with populations that don't have access to the internet constantly. How do we do that at a low cost manner?
One more question before I go to Nathan. So 50% go back to the photographers. If you don't mind, I dig a little bit about the financial stuff. Can they make a living with that?
Only
or do
some.
they need to have other jobs? Because a lot of photographers, they need to do another different jobs.
Only some, and that's what I mentioned in my speech. The nature of producing artwork is some people are better than others at it. I mean, we're training a broad section of women and girls, and we're training them because we understand there is the value of emotion empowerment and for them to have their voices heard. Now, some of them might be able to sell, and I can count in now, I would say around 20% of our women and girls would have the intention to actually make some money from photography. I mean, the rest just see it as emotion empowerment. They might have their kids to take care of, or they work in the garment factory. But the amount that 20%, currently there are a few stars who are getting most of the attention, most of the awards. We have 10 women in our network who have become full-time photographers who are making a living. But of course that number is very small out of the 800 we've trained. So something that I'm thinking about is how can we increase that number? But we've kind of reached a blockade because we just have limited financial ability to help then reach the next level. But I think today, like the platform co-operativism idea is really good because maybe I could turn into this community ownership model where I'm bringing in people who share our values, that they chip in and we kind of then would just really have more money to actualize this vision of empowering women through photography.
And just a note, Stocksy has a similar pattern where a fairly small number of members are producing a lot of the financial benefits and so forth. So this is not, unique to your, as you know, to your platform. These are very common dynamics, and and the question is how to make sure that in the context of that kind of dynamic that people are seeing the benefit of the value that they're producing, even if there are inequalities in that value.
Nathan, you mentioned about 3 or 4 strategies that companies or organizations can pursue to transform themselves into platform cooperatives. Now, one of them is ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Program. I remember back in the 1990s when I was a university student, and hearing a lot about ESOP programs in a lot of big for-profit companies back then. But we didn't hear much of that afterwards. Is this a coming back, a return to ESOP? In what way is this ESOP that we're talking here different from the kind of ESOP that people have talked about 20 years ago?
All right. So this structure has enabled in the U.S. 14 million employee owners to co-own the companies where they work. It actually growth did slow after the 90s. So it's your comment reflects, your experience reflects a reality, partly because the regulatory situation changed. But one of the things I've been focusing on is I've spent the last year kind of immersing myself in the work of the creator of the ESOP, Louis Kelso, who was a California lawyer. Actually, initially went to my university, University of Colorado, and was part of the rise of Silicon Valley. But he actually saw that ESOP as only the beginning, and proposed as many as 8 different kinds of shared ownership plans. And this to me was really interesting because in the tech world, formal employees tend to, actually stock options are quite common. When companies are successful, they tend to get paid very well. But they tend to, we see the largest companies in tech having an order of magnitude fewer actual employees than, say, the previous generation of large companies. They're employing fewer people formally, but they're relying on value being created by a large range of other stakeholders, from Facebook users, Uber drivers who are not employees, all these sorts of things. And so I'm very interested in how this strategy of using structures like trusts, cooperatives, other mechanisms can actually enfranchise the people who are being left out of the value creation mechanisms of the online economy. Recognizing that the way this thing is structured now, it's creating an aristocracy of a relatively small number of people who have access to formal employment and its benefits, and a very large number of people who are not cut into that deal. And that we could, following what Kelso imagined, beyond the ESOP, look to structures that recognize the other forms of stakeholdership we have in our lives as customers, as citizens, as community members. What if we had structures that allowed, members of a community to co-own, the creation process of a bridge that they use, of their utility company. We're having conversations now in the U.S. around whether Californians could own their imperiled energy company. So this is really a call for a much broader range of stakeholder roles becoming correlated with ownership, recognizing that in this Industrial Revolution 4.0, that employment relationship is not what it was in the previous industrial phase. It doesn't appear that we can rely on employment as the vital and sole economic relationship in our lives. And maybe the mechanism to use to ensure that the benefits of the platform economy are more widely distributed and shared and aligned is through new forms of community ownership.
Fantastic. So let's open to the floor because I was told we have 15-20 minutes left. Questions. Let's take a few questions and I'll answer them together. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Michael, yeah?
Yep.
Can you introduce yourself and the questions?
Yes, I'm Michael. We study in sharing economy actually. What I would like to focus on is about the issue of trust in platform cooperatives. Because in now platform economy, when we talk about trust, is about the rating system, which actually causing a problem of actually peer-to-peer surveillance actually, right? I'm actually not quite sure whether it's trust or distrust, but how is it emerge or actually how it maintains the trust in platform cooperatives, which may or may not different from the platform economy? Yeah.
Next questions? If no questions, then we'll pass it to Bonnie.
Yeah, I think trust, for me, the friendship formula is quite interesting to think about trust. And I don't, you know, when people talk about startups or social enterprises, the concept of friendship is not really talked about because it's still quite transactional. So I think friendship is an important concept to draw out when we talk about trust. Because it's also mutual accountability. Like what we found is with some of our trainers, our volunteers in different countries, they are friends with the students and they feel a sense of accountability to them that I don't have to enforce from headquarters and say you have to do this. And so I think that's a way for us to achieve trust. But I think it also comes back to your mission and vision. A good example is contrasting with Facebook and how Facebook, the mission is like connecting the world, and they have very grandiose statements about how they're making the world a better place. But of course that is really contradictory to some of the ways that they have used our data without our consent. And so that then erodes trust. And I think what is important to recognize is that platform cooperative could also potentially be abused or not be doing the right thing for their users, even though there are more mechanisms to counteract that. But trust takes so long to build. I think we take, in each country, it takes us at least 2 years to really build a very solid relationship with our community stakeholders. Because there have been so many bad examples before us where people come in and try to do something and they might say, oh, we'll give you money back. But then they don't do that, and then that destroys the relationship, and it takes a long time to rebuild that. So I think what's important for us to recognize is trust does take very long to build and rebuild, but it takes just one incident to just destroy.
Yeah, and I think that your experience is really telling there, and I love the FBI friendship formula. That's really creepy, but really telling also about what real trust looks like. And first of all, I just want to point out when I used trust in kind of a different way earlier, and I just want to make sure I'm not confusing anybody. The trust structures I was talking about are kind of legal entities that can hold assets on behalf of people and purposes. So it's a little different. But trust is is crucial to the platform economy. But I think there's trust, which you just described, and then trust, which is this simulated experience of trust that is created through mechanisms, like, for instance, rating systems on platforms. And this is how the platform economy scales. This is one of its most powerful tools, is it replaces community-based, long-built, expensive, friction-full human trust, like friendship and communitarianism and religious communities, all sorts of forms, and supplants it with a much cheaper, faster, simulated trust through rating systems, through mechanistic accountability. What the platform cooperative efforts often try to do is actually connect the two again, to make sure that the platforms are actually leading people, rather than destroying trust that once existed in communities and replacing it with mechanisms, to actually use platform technologies to rebuild and strengthen trust in communities. cooperatives. That's why it's so important for many of these platform co-ops to operate locally, as well as maybe sharing software globally. For instance, that Airbnb example allows people who are coming into a place as tourists to contribute to local organizations and to form relationships with local community organizations that they might not otherwise encounter in a purely transactional relationship. So, understanding those different kinds of real trust, old-fashioned human trust based on relationship, and mechanistic platform quote-unquote trust, is crucial.
Great. More questions, please. Yep, go ahead. Okay, now, while waiting for the floor, let me have one or two questions. We only have one or two cooperatives in Hong Kong. One is a fishery cooperative, one is a farmers cooperative. Any speculations why we have so few cooperatives in Hong Kong? Is there something can be done to have more cooperatives in Hong Kong?
I can do a little more than speculate because I've spent the last day spending a lot of time with people trying to build cooperatives in Hong Kong. And one of the problems, which is present in many parts of the world too, is that the cooperative legal infrastructures were designed with often these kinds of models in mind. And this is especially important to note in British colonies. The British developed cooperative structures in colonies for particular purposes that may not be as applicable in contemporary circumstances. What we've had to do in the US often is actually change our cooperative laws in order to accommodate the needs of the new cooperatives. In Colorado, where I live, a lot of our co-ops too historically are large agricultural co-ops. My family was brought to Colorado by what became a beet processing cooperative to farm beets and process them into sugar, right? And so that's what we are equipped for, or were equipped for. But some forward-looking co-op lawyers some years ago developed a new structure called a limited cooperative association that is very flexible, allows for multi-stakeholder models, which is great for platforms because they often have multiple forms of stakeholdership. It allows for some investor participation, which is important when you're engaging in high-risk activities without allowing investor control. So one of the really important things that the platform co-op movement and network community is working toward is to ensure that we have, wherever we can, the policy arrangements in place that allow for us to apply the cooperative model and strategy to some of the applications beyond the historic use cases in agriculture and the like.
Any opinion, Moni?
I think maybe Hong Kong people are too greedy and don't want to share. I don't know, I'm just guessing.
Okay. Any questions from the floor further? Okay, so what kind of policies, what can the government, if the government has any role at all, what can the government in terms of the policies can do to encourage more cooperatives, in particular platform cooperatives, to emerge in Hong Kong?
I think in Hong Kong it's really just important that people start doing things from bottom up. I'm not an expert cooperative. I think probably some legal guidance would help to clarify how cooperative could be set up. But I think it's just really important that social entrepreneurs, if you're inspired by this conversation about cooperative and community ownership, and I am definitely, so I'm going to chat with you and see if I can kind of turn this non-profit using a platform cooperative model, and if we could have some more examples, then I think people will visualize this as a viable alternative and start using it that way.
We have 5 minutes left. Any questions?
If people want to go home before the travel instructions. I've finished with my questions. Any last words that you'd like to share? Oh, one more. Okay, please.
Thank you.
if you have maybe some ideas to share with us in terms of places where we can start looking for legal structures or some cues that can help us start something similar, because as we've been discussing, the ideas we think are great. We share many of those important concepts and values behind all the topics that we've been talking about, but it seems that a problem is where to start in terms of the legal structure, and especially when you want to create something that is not just local. I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the real challenges that we face with the existing cooperative laws in many places are they're designed for local projects, right? And for instance, Stocksy is incorporated under Canadian law, and they've actually had to move provinces of incorporation just to have something that's more amenable to their international membership. That's been a big challenge. And so, you know, there's a real kind of global need for structures that recognize the urge to create global platforms. One place to start, a platform that a group of us have created, is called the Internet of Ownership, and it's just a kind of resource hub. The website is ioo.coop. We have a directory of platform co-ops around the world and supporting organizations. And we also have a resource library that we're in the process of really expanding that includes some legal documents and internal governance documents, as well as just basic readings about this community.
And Yento, do you want to perhaps, are you doing any academic research in this, and any last thoughts from you?
It's a very new area. I've written a news article in Hong Kong Free Press on that, and also a book which has published in Japan, and there was an invitation to give a keynote speech in the platform conference in Japan. So we have been interrupted for this moment in Hong Kong. So it is really very new, and there's been even no formal study in this area. Everyone is still learning, and what we learned together from this conversation is the need for a clearer legal structure. And the first thing people will ask is, how can I start one? How do I register this? So we need to have this very clear. So everyone, the public, members of the public, can clearly know, what kind of legal options they can choose if they want to create a new one or transform the existing social enterprises or companies or non-profit organizations into a cooperative model. So
and I would really encourage, what I just said shouldn't be taken as an urge to wait until the law comes into place. I mean, for instance, I'm part of a co-op, a platform co-op that wasn't, it is still a legal nonprofit as it was before, but what we did was restructure the governance and culture to be a cooperative. And so now we identify as a cooperative. It's changed how we see ourselves. It's changed how our board is chosen. And so, I think it's really important to recognize that cooperative legacies and values can be incorporated into organizations that don't necessarily have the cooperative legal structure, especially when that's not accessible. And in the U.S. we have cooperatives that are structured as LLCs, as limited liability companies, or as nonprofits, especially in cases where the laws aren't great for formal cooperatives.
Yeah, and I think there will be a lot of advances around tokenization, and you can issue your own coin using blockchain. It seems very easily. So I think there are new ways of thinking how to do that. But I take your point that it's really about the values, and you can very easily start with governance, whether it's a non-profit or for-profit.
Thank you very much. So let me summarize this in 3 points. We need more efforts to create a greater public understanding of what platforms cooperatives are and how we can set up these things, what kind of legal options we can do, perhaps more questions about what can the government policies be put into place to encourage more people to set up more cooperatives and platform cooperatives, and for people to consider perhaps for younger people, for younger generations who might feel discontent with the current world, to be a bigger part of the platform cooperatives or cooperative in general, so they can have a a sense of belonging that they own something. And hopefully that might be one of the solutions to the kind of situations where we are in Hong Kong. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully that's useful. I understood that we will have a YouTube link from this conversation uploaded later at a certain point in time. And we have gifts for our guest speakers.